Sorry about my appearance. I've just washed my hair. And yesterday, after the cocktail party, it was so late before I remembered to record. I thought I'd read a story now rather than waiting. So we're on book 2. And there are 13 stories in this book as well, which surprised me about the last one. It seems an odd number. A baker's dozen. And here's the first one, which is called Milly Molly Mandy Gets Up Early. Once upon a time, one beautiful summer morning, Milly Molly Mandy woke up very early. She knew it was very early because Father and Mother were not moving. Milly Molly Mandy's cot bed was in one corner of Father's and Mother's room. And she knew it was a beautiful summer morning because the cracks around the window blinds were so bright she could hardly look at them. Milly Molly Mandy knelt up on the foot of her cot bed and softly lifted up one corner of the blind and peeped out. And it was the most beautiful, quiet summer morning that ever was. The doves in the dovecot were saying to each other in a soft, lazy sort of way, and the hens round the hen house in the field were saying to each other in a soft, busy sort of way, and old Marmaduke the cock was yelling to everybody at the top of his voice, only it sounded soft because I don't think mine did. He was right the other side of the barn, but of course I'm just here in front of you. Well, said Milly Molly Mandy to herself, it's much too beautiful a morning to stay in bed till breakfast time. I think I'll get up very, very quietly so as not to wake Father and Mother. So Milly Molly Mandy slid out of bed very, very quietly, and she slid into her socks and into her clothes as far as her petticoat. There she is. And then she crept to the washstand. But she didn't think she could manage the big water jug without waking Father and Mother, so she took up her shoes and her pink-striped cotton frock, and she creepy-crept to the door and opened it, only making just one tiny little click. And then she creepy-crept down the stairs without disturbing Grandpa or Grandma or Uncle or Auntie into the kitchen. It looked funny and dark in the kitchen, for the curtains were still drawn. Topsy the cat jumped off Grandma's chair and came yawning and stretching to meet her. And Milly Molly Mandy had to stoop down and let Topsy the cat dab her little cold nose very, very lightly against her warm cheek for good morning. And then Milly Molly Mandy went into the scullery to wash. But when she turned on the tap, she suddenly thought of the brook at the bottom of the meadow, so she just washed her hands and neck and saved her face to wash in the brook. And then she put on her frock and shoes and softly unlocked the back door and slipped outside. It really was a most beautiful fresh morning, full of little bird voices, and Toby the dog was making little thumping noises in his kennel because he'd heard her and was excited to think somebody was up. So Milly Molly Mandy ran and let him off his chain, but she held his collar and whispered, hush, Toby, very sternly, until they got as far as the meadow. And then she let him go, and Toby the dog barked and capered, and Milly Molly Mandy, with the breeze in her hair, ran hoppity-skip down to the brook through the long grass and the dewdrops that sparkled all colours in the sun. The water looked so lovely and clear and cold, rippling over the stones, that Milly Molly Mandy couldn't decide all at once which was the nicest spot to wash her face in. So she was walking along beside it a little way, when suddenly whom should she see in the next field but little friend Susan, up early too. Susan, called Milly Molly Mandy. Milly Molly Mandy, called little friend Susan, there are mushrooms in this field. So Milly Molly Mandy and Toby the dog ran and clambered through the railings into the next field, and there were mushrooms in that field, for Milly Molly Mandy nearly trod on one straight away, only she just didn't. She picked it and ran to show to little friend Susan and say, fancy you being up so early, Susan. And little friend Susan ran to show Milly Molly Mandy her 3 mushrooms and say, fancy you being up so early, Milly Molly Mandy. There they are, waving to each other. Then they searched all over the field together, but they didn't find any more mushrooms. And then they came to another field, and suddenly, whom should they see in the middle of the other field but Billy Blunt, up early too. Billy, called Milly Molly Mandy. Mushrooms, called Billy Blunt. So MillyMollyMandy and little friend Susan and Toby the dog ran and clambered over the stile into the other field and went to show Billy Blunt their mushrooms and say, "Fancy you being up so early, Billy." And Billy Blunt came to show them his 2 mushrooms and say, "Fancy anybody stopping in bed." And then they found quite a lot of mushrooms growing together in one patch, and they all gave a gasp and a shout and set to work picking in great excitement. And when they'd finished gathering, whom should they see coming into the field with a basket over his arm but the shabby boy who'd run in a race with Billy Blunt at a fete last bank holiday and beaten him. He seemed to be looking for mushrooms too, and as he came near, MillyMollyMandy smiled at him a bit, and he smiled a bit back, and little friend Susan said, "Hello," and he said, "Hello," and Billy Blunt said, "Plenty of mushrooms here," and the boy said, "Are there?" And then MillyMollyMandy said, "Look what we've got," and the boy looked, and then little friend Susan said, "How many have you got?" And the boy showed his basket, but there weren't many in it. And then Billy Blunt said, "What are you going to do with them?" And the boy said, "Sell them to Mr. Smale, the grocer, if I can get enough. If not, we eat them, my grandad and I, only we'd rather have the money." And then MillyMollyMandy said, "Let's help to get the basket full." So they spread about over the field and looked everywhere for mushrooms, and they really got quite a lot, but the basket wasn't full. And then Billy Blunt and MillyMollyMandy and little friend Susan looked questioningly at each other and at their own heap of mushrooms, and then they nodded to each other and piled them all into the basket. "My word," said the boy with a beaming face, "won't Grandad be pleased today?" And then he thanked them all very much and said goodbye and went off home. MillyMollyMandy and little friend Susan and Billy Blunt felt very satisfied with their morning's work. They'd enjoyed it so much they made plans to get up early another morning and go mushrooming together, with baskets for themselves this time. And then they said goodbye till they should meet again for school, and MillyMollyMandy called Toby the dog, and they went off home to their breakfast. And it wasn't till she got in that MillyMollyMandy remembered she'd never washed her face in the brook after all, so she had to go up and do it in the basin in the ordinary way. No, it won't stop again. And Grandpa isn't here to say don't shut the laptop, so I'm just going to do that.